In the vast emptiness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that every sapient species learns: never underestimate a species that calls itself human. The Galactic Council had dismissed Earth as a backwater planet populated by primitive apes who had barely mastered faster-than-light travel. They were creatures of violence, yes, but surely no match for the sophisticated warfare of advanced civilizations. The humans had been quarantined to their small sector of space, left to play with their crude weapons while the real powers of the galaxy conducted important business. But, when the Zephyrian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, sent out a distress signal that would echo across the stars, they had no idea they were about to discover why the most dangerous predator in the galaxy had been quietly building the most terrifying war machine the universe had ever seen. This is the story of how a single SOS call would awaken humanity's true nature, and how the galaxy would learn that there are far worse things in the darkness than death itself. Sometimes, the most terrifying response to a cry for help comes from those you least expect to answer. Welcome to the day the galaxy realized why humans don't just fight wars, they perfect them. Admiral Zexthera's forearms trembled as she watched the tactical display aboard her flagship, the Eternal Glory. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought, once the pride of the Empire's Third Fleet, now drifted powerlessly through space, its crystalline hull scarred with deep gouges from weapons that defied all known physics. Around her, the bridge crew of insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in panic as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. "Admiral," chittered Communications Officer Veltar, his compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting, "we've lost contact with 17 more vessels. The conquest of stars just disappeared from sensors entirely." Zexthera's primary eyes focused on the main screen while her secondary pair scanned the tactical readouts. What she saw there violated everything she understood about warfare. Ships didn't simply vanish from existence. Energy signatures didn't spike beyond measurable parameters and, then, drop to absolute zero. And enemy vessels certainly didn't move through space at velocities that approached the theoretical limits of physics itself. "How many ships remain operational?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. 43 out of 216, Admiral. And most of those are running on emergency power only. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their crystalline exoskeletons could withstand the vacuum of space, their hive-mind coordination made them perfect for large-scale warfare, and their technology had been refined through countless conquests. They had never met an enemy they couldn't eventually overwhelm through superior numbers and tactical precision. Until today. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the enemy fleet," Veltar announced, his voice carrying an unusual harmonic that indicated extreme stress. On screen, the holographic display shimmered and revealed something that made Zexthera's secondary heart skip several beats. The creature before her was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It stood upright on two legs, with pale pink skin stretched over a surprisingly delicate frame. Its head was crowned with dark fur, and two small forward-facing eyes stared out from a face that seemed almost absurdly vulnerable. No natural armor, no visible weapons, no apparent adaptations for space combat. "I am Admiral Chenwei of the Terran Defense Fleet," the creature said in perfectly translated galactic standard. "You sent out a general distress signal approximately 6 hours ago. We responded as per Galactic Rescue Protocol 77 Alpha. However, upon arrival, our sensors detected you were engaged in aggressive action against the civilian population of Kepler 442b. Zexthera's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Terran? That designation is not in our databases. What species are you? What authority gives you the right to interfere in Zephyrian military operations?" The human's expression didn't change, but something in those small eyes grew colder. "We're humans, Admiral. And the authority comes from the fact that you're murdering innocent people." "Humans?" Zexthera's mind raced through her memory. The designation was familiar, but only barely. "You're from the quarantine sector. The primitive world Terra 3. You barely achieved faster-than-light travel 50 of your years ago." "Earth," Admiral Chan corrected quietly. "We call our world Earth. And, yes, we're relatively new to interstellar travel. But we're very old at war." The transmission ended, and Zexthera stared at the empty screen for several moments. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged nervous clicks. A species barely 50 years into space travel had just decimated one of the most powerful fleets in the Zephyrian Armada. It was impossible. Admiral, Veltar's voice cracked. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildups from the human fleet. I don't understand these readings. The power signatures are unlike anything we've encountered. Show me. The tactical display updated, and Zexthara felt her tertiary heart stop entirely. The human fleet consisted of only 27 vessels, compared to her original force of over 200. But, the energy readings emanating from those ships suggested destructive capability that exceeded theoretical maximums. More disturbing still, the ships themselves seemed to be reconfiguring, their hulls shifting and adapting in ways that suggested technology far beyond what a primitive species should possess. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission," Veltar announced. It's being broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Every ship in the system is receiving it. Put it through." This time, a different human appeared on screen. This one was older, with silver fur on its head and deep lines around its eyes that spoke of vast experience. Unlike Admiral Chan's military uniform, this human wore simple civilian clothing. "My name is Dr. Sarah Martinez, xenolinguist and cultural attaché for the Terran fleet. I'm broadcasting this message to all Zephyrian personnel currently in this system. In approximately 10 minutes, our fleet will commence what we call humanitarian intervention. I want you to understand what that means." Dr. Martinez paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press against Zexthara's consciousness. 6 hours ago, your fleet began orbital bombardment of a civilian colony on Kepler 442b. The colonists are Altharians, herbivorous, peaceful, with no military capability whatsoever. They sent out a distress signal, which we intercepted. In the past 6 hours, your weapons have killed approximately 40,000 innocent beings. The human's eyes hardened. 40,000 mothers, fathers, children, elders. 40,000 individuals who never hurt anyone, who spent their days growing crops and raising families and creating art. You murdered them because you wanted their world. Zexthara's claws scraped against her command console. This is war. Conquest is the natural order. The weak serve the strong. But, Dr. Martinez continued as if she hadn't heard the interruption. What you don't understand, Admiral Zexthara, is that humans have a very particular response to this kind of behavior. We have a word for it in our oldest languages: genocide. And, we have spent the last 50 years of our spacefaring existence preparing for the day we would encounter it among the stars. The transmission shifted, and, suddenly, the screen displayed detailed technical schematics of human warships. Zexthara's breath caught as she realized what she was seeing. "These are our Retribution-class dreadnoughts," Dr. Martinez explained calmly. "Each one carries enough firepower to crack a moon. The energy readings your sensors are detecting come from their primary weapons systems, gravitational field manipulators that can create localized black holes, quantum disruptors that can unmake matter at the subatomic level, and temporal distortion cannons that can age a target centuries in seconds." The schematics updated, showing the interior of the massive vessels. Each ship carries a crew of 15,000, and each crew member has volunteered for a mission from which they do not expect to return. They are here because 40,000 innocent beings died on their watch, and that is unacceptable. Zexthara found her voice. "You cannot have developed such technology so quickly. Your species has barely left your home world." Dr. Martinez smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, I think you misunderstand something fundamental about humanity. We didn't develop this technology after we reached the stars. We've been developing it for over 10,000 years. We've just been waiting for a target worthy of it." The transmission continued, and now the screen showed historical footage from Earth. Images of massive human armies clashing across continents, cities reduced to rubble, weapons of unimaginable destruction turning entire landscapes into wasteland. "You see, Admiral, humans are not primitive. We're experienced. We have fought wars across every continent of our world, in every possible environment, using every conceivable technology. We have poisoned atmospheres, boiled oceans, and turned entire regions uninhabitable for centuries.
We have committed every atrocity you can imagine, and many you cannot.
The image is shifted to show massive industrial complexes, millions of humans working in perfect coordination to produce weapons, vehicles, and war materials on a scale that dwarfed anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever achieved. And then, 50 years ago, we met our first aliens. The Centaurians were peaceful traders who taught us about the galaxy, about the various species and civilizations among the stars. We learned about the Galactic Council, about trade routes and diplomacy and all the wonderful possibilities of interstellar civilization. Now the images showed massive space-based construction facilities, human workers in environmental suits assembling vessels of incredible complexity and size. We also learned about the Zephyrian Empire. About the 17 species you've driven to extinction. About the slave worlds where you force captured populations to mine resources for your war machine. About your conquest doctrine that treats sapient life as a resource to be harvested. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. So we spent 50 years preparing. We built our fleets in the darkness between stars where your sensors couldn't detect them. We developed weapons specifically designed to counter every known Zephyrian technology. And we waited. Waited for what? Zexthara demanded. For you to give us a legal reason to use them. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the soft clicking of nervous Zephyrian crew members. Zexthara stared at the tactical display, watching as the human fleet began moving into attack formation. Each vessel moved with a precision that spoke of crews trained to perfection, of technology refined through generations of warfare, of a species that had turned the art of destruction into a science. Admiral, Veltar whispered, incoming priority transmission from the capital world. It's Emperor Caxthal himself. The Emperor's image appeared on screen, his golden carapace glinting even through the holographic projection. His compound eyes fixed on Zexthara with an intensity that made her want to prostrate herself. Admiral, explain to me why I am receiving reports that a force of primitive aliens has decimated the Third Fleet. Your Majesty, the humans they're not what our intelligence suggested. Their technology appears to be far more advanced than impossible. Our spies have monitored their home world for decades. They are barely capable of interstellar flight. What could 27 primitive vessels possibly do against the might of the Zephyrian Empire? Before Zexthara could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical display erupted in warnings as massive energy signatures appeared throughout the system. Not from the human fleet, from everywhere else. Admiral, Veltar's voice cracked with panic, new contacts appearing throughout the system. Hundreds of them. They're emerging from stealth somehow. They've been here all along. The display updated, and Zexthara felt her entire worldview crumble. What she had taken for a small exploration fleet was merely the visible tip of an armada that defied comprehension. Massive human dreadnoughts, each one larger than her flagship, materialized from sophisticated cloaking fields. Destroyer squadrons, cruiser wings, carrier groups, an entire invasion fleet that had been hiding in plain sight. How many? She whispered. Over 3,000 vessels, Admiral. And they're all targeting our positions. Emperor Caxthal's image flickered as his own sensors undoubtedly detected the same readings. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This is impossible, he breathed. No species could hide a fleet of that magnitude. Our sensors, your sensors, came a new voice, and Admiral Chen's image replaced the Emperor's on the main screen, were designed to detect conventional propulsion and energy signatures. Human stealth technology operates on principles your science hasn't discovered yet. The Admiral's expression was calm, almost conversational. Emperor Caxthal, I presume? I am Admiral Chenwei, commanding the Terran Expeditionary Force. We need to talk. I do not negotiate with primitives, the Emperor snarled. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Your Majesty, you have exactly 10 minutes to order the immediate withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from this system and to surrender for trial all personnel involved in the bombardment of Kepler 442b. If you refuse, we will consider the Zephyrian Empire to be in a state of war with humanity. You dare threaten the Zephyrian Empire? We have ruled this sector for 3 millennia. Our fleets number in the tens of thousands.
Our armies will be swept away like sand before a tsunami, Admiral Chen interrupted quietly. Your Majesty, I don't think you understand the situation. We didn't bring one fleet to this system. We brought 12. The tactical display exploded with new contacts as additional human fleets dropped their stealth fields throughout the system and beyond. Zexthera's sensors detected massive formations of human warships positioned at every strategic point within 50 light-years, cutting off all possible escape routes. 40,000 innocent people died today, Admiral Chen continued. That is unacceptable. It will not happen again. You now have 9 minutes to comply with our demands. Emperor Caxthal's image sputtered with rage. This is madness. You cannot possibly have built such a fleet in 50 years. Your species lacks the industrial capacity, the resources, the experience. Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of grim amusement. Your Majesty, humans have been perfecting the art of warfare since before we discovered fire. We've fought with sticks and stones, bronze and iron, gunpowder and atomic weapons. We've developed strategies for every possible scenario, tactics for every conceivable environment, weapons for every imaginable target. The Admiral leaned forward. What we haven't had, until now, is a target worthy of our full attention. Congratulations, Your Majesty. The Zephyrian Empire has just become humanity's first interstellar war. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell into stunned silence. Zexthera stared at the tactical display, watching as human vessels continued to appear throughout local space. Each ship was a masterpiece of military engineering, designed and built by a species that had turned warfare into their primary cultural achievement. Admiral, Veltar whispered, "What are your orders?" Zexthera looked around her bridge at the crew members who had served with her through dozens of conquests. Good soldiers, loyal to the Empire, trained from hatching to believe in Zephyrian superiority. Now they stared at her with compound eyes that reflected confusion, fear, and the dawning realization that everything they had believed about their place in the universe was about to change. "Signal all ships," she said quietly. "Prepare for battle. And, may the Hive preserve us all, because I don't think anything else will." Outside the viewports, human warships began moving into attack positions, their hulls gleaming with the reflected light of distant stars. Each vessel carried enough firepower to devastate worlds, crewed by members of a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill efficiently and without mercy. The galaxy was about to discover why the most dangerous predator often looks the most harmless. The countdown had reached 0, and the universe held its breath. Admiral Chenwei stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the tactical display with the calm attention of someone who had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who knew their business intimately. No shouting, no panic, no dramatic speeches. Just humans doing what humans did best. "Admiral," reported Commander Sarah Kim, his tactical officer, "all fleet elements report ready. We have confirmed target locks on every Zephyrian vessel in the system. Confirmed enemy positions? 216 vessels remaining operational, sir. They're attempting to form defensive formations, but their tactical doctrine appears to be built around overwhelming numerical superiority. They don't seem to know how to respond to being outnumbered." Chen nodded slowly. The Zephyrians had controlled this sector of space for 3,000 years, conquering primitive species and absorbing their resources. They had never faced an enemy that could match their technology, let alone exceed it. They were about to learn why humans had spent 50 years studying their every battle, analyzing their every tactic, and preparing counters to their every possible move. "Communications, put me through to the fleet." "Channel open, sir." Chen activated his command console, knowing that his words were being transmitted to over 3,000 human warships spread throughout the system. 15 million humans who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return home. 15 million humans who had looked at the images of dead Altharian children and decided that some lines could not be crossed. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Today we face the Zephyrian Empire in the name of 40,000 innocent beings who will never see another sunrise. We are not here for conquest or glory. We are here because genocide is unacceptable, regardless of who commits it or where it occurs.
He paused, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so vast and mysterious. Humanity had dreamed of finding brothers among the stars, but instead they had found predators. That was acceptable. Humans understood predators. The enemy believes they are superior because they are older, because they have conquered before. They are about to learn the difference between conquest and war. Show them what happens when humans decide that enough is enough. "Aye, sir," came the responses from 3,000 captains, and Chen could hear in their voices the same cold determination that had built the pyramids, that had crossed oceans in wooden ships, that had split atoms and walked on distant moons. The Zephyrian fleet had arranged itself into their traditional formation, a crystalline matrix that allowed each ship to support its neighbors with overlapping fields of fire. It was a formation that had served them well against species that fought with conventional tactics and predictable weapons. It would have been impressive against almost any enemy they had faced before. "Commander Kim, initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7, aye sir. All ships, weapons free. Commence temporal displacement." The first indication the Zephyrians had that something was wrong came when their sensors began reporting impossible readings. Human ships were moving through time itself, aging their targets at accelerated rates while remaining untouched by return fire. The crystalline hulls of Zephyrian vessels, designed to last millennia, began showing signs of metal fatigue and structural decay as centuries passed in seconds. Admiral Zexthera watched in horror as her flagship's hull plating began to corrode and crack. "What kind of weapon is this?" she demanded. "Temporal distortion field," came the calm response from the human fleet. Dr. Martinez's image appeared on every Zephyrian screen simultaneously. "We're using controlled gravitational fields to create localized time differentials. Your ships are aging approximately 100 years per second while our vessels remain in normal temporal flow." The scientific impossibility of it staggered Zexthera's mind. Manipulating time itself as a weapon? Her species had theories about such things, but they were purely theoretical. The energy requirements alone should have been beyond any portable generation system. "How?" she gasped as another section of her ship's hull simply crumbled away. "Humanity has spent 50 years preparing for this war," Dr. Martinez replied. "We studied every piece of intelligence about Zephyrian technology, every battle record, every tactical manual we could acquire. We identified every weakness in your defensive systems and developed specific countermeasures." The human fleet moved through the Zephyrian formation like sharks among minnows. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles simply fell apart as their molecular structure aged beyond the point of cohesion. Weapon systems failed as their components degraded past functionality. Life support systems collapsed as their power sources exhausted fuel that should have lasted decades. But the humans weren't finished. "Commander Kim, initiate Protocol 12. Protocol 12, aye sir. All ships, deploy gravitational anchors." Now the space around each Zephyrian vessel began to distort as massive gravitational fields locked onto their hulls. The ships found themselves unable to maneuver, held in place by artificial gravity wells that made escape impossible. One by one, they were being captured rather than destroyed. "Why are you taking prisoners?" Zexthera demanded over the communication channel. Admiral Chen's image appeared on her screen, and his expression was grim. "Because, Admiral, you're going to stand trial for what you did to those colonists. Every single one of you who participated in that bombardment will face justice." "Trial? You have no authority over Zephyrian citizens." "We do now," Chen replied quietly. "As of today, humanity is claiming legal jurisdiction over all cases of genocide within this sector of space. The Galactic Council can file a complaint if they disagree." Around the system, human ships were methodically disabling and capturing every Zephyrian vessel. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. The technological gap between the two species was so vast that resistance was futile. Weapons that should have been able to crack planets bounced harmlessly off human shields. Engines that could push massive ships near light speed were held motionless by gravitational anchors. "This is impossible," Emperor Caxthol's voice crackled over the communication system. "No species develops technology this advanced in 50 years. Dr. Martinez smiled coldly. "Your Majesty, you keep saying that.
But, you're operating under a false assumption. You think we developed this technology after we left Earth. The truth is, we've been working on these theories for centuries. We just needed a reason to build them. The display shifted to show images from human history laboratories, research facilities, universities where humans had spent generations studying theoretical physics, exotic matter, and advanced engineering concepts. When we learned about the galaxy, about species like yours, we realized we would eventually need to defend ourselves against empires that had been conquering for millennia. So we took our best theoretical work and turned it into practical weapons systems. Every human ship in this fleet represents technologies that Earth's scientists had been dreaming about for generations. She gestured toward the tactical display where Zephyrian ships continued to surrender or fall apart. We used our time wisely, Your Majesty. While you were conquering primitive species and growing complacent, we were building the most advanced military force in the galaxy. The last Zephyrian vessel powered down its weapons and submitted to capture. In less than 30 minutes, an empire that had ruled this sector for 3,000 years had been completely defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive savages. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished. Communications, open a channel to the Galactic Council. Channel open, sir. The main screen shifted to show the assembly chamber of the Galactic Council, where representatives from dozens of species were gathered in emergency session. Chen could see the shock and confusion on their alien faces as they struggled to process what had just occurred. Esteemed counselors, Chen began formally, I am Admiral Chenwei of the Terran Defense Fleet. We have just concluded military operations against the Zephyrian Empire in response to their genocidal actions against the civilian population of Kepler 442b. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Multiple species began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of protests, demands, and questions. Finally, Council Speaker Thanemore, a tall crystalline being from the Andromedae cluster, called for order. Admiral Chen, humanity was specifically restricted to your home sector under the Galactic Quarantine Protocols. You had no authority to intervene in this situation. Chen's expression didn't change. Councillor Thanemore, humanity never agreed to those protocols. They were imposed upon us without our consent when we first achieved faster-than-light travel. As sovereign beings, we reject any claim of authority over our actions. You cannot simply reject galactic law. We're not rejecting galactic law, Chen replied calmly. We're establishing new law. As of today, humanity is claiming legal jurisdiction over all acts of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder within this galaxy. We consider these crimes against all sapient life, and we will respond accordingly regardless of who commits them. The council chamber fell silent. The implications of Chen's statement were staggering. A single species was declaring itself the arbiter of justice for the entire galaxy. You have no authority to make such a claim, Thanemore protested weakly. Authority comes from ability, Counselor. We have just demonstrated our ability to enforce our will against one of the galaxy's major military powers. If you doubt our authority, you're welcome to test it. Chen activated his tactical display, showing the Council the disposition of human forces throughout the sector. We currently have active military operations underway against 17 different systems where Zephyrian forces are engaged in similar activities. We estimate that we'll have the entire Zephyrian Empire neutralized within 72 hours. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of human ships, millions of human personnel, all deployed simultaneously across dozens of star systems. The logistics alone should have been impossible for a species that had supposedly achieved space travel only 50 years ago. Councillor Velnath of the Hegemony spoke up, her tentacles writhing with agitation. Even if you have the military capability, you cannot simply declare yourself the galaxy's police force. There are protocols, procedures, legal frameworks that have been in place for millennia, protocols that allowed the Zephyrians to commit genocide for 3,000 years, Chen interrupted. Legal frameworks that classified the extinction of 17 sapient species as territorial expansion. Procedures that quarantined humanity while permitting the enslavement of entire worlds. He leaned forward, and his voice carried the weight of moral authority. Your protocols failed, counselors. Your procedures are worthless. Your legal frameworks are built on the assumption that might makes right, and that the strong have the right to prey upon the weak. The image shifted to show footage from Kepler 442b, where Altharian survivors were being rescued from the ruins of their cities. These people trusted in galactic law to protect them. They filed formal complaints with the Council when Zephyrian forces entered their system. They followed every proper procedure, submitted every required document, and appealed through every available channel. The footage showed bodies. Thousands of them. Men, women, children, all killed from orbit because they had been inconvenient obstacles to Zephyrian expansion. Where was galactic law when they needed it? Chen asked quietly. Where were the Council's protocols when innocent people were being murdered? Your legal frameworks didn't save them. Your procedures didn't protect them. Your authority was worthless when it mattered most. The Council chamber remained silent. Multiple species that had built their civilizations on law and diplomacy found themselves confronted by a species that had built theirs on the principle that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the consequences. So we're establishing new rules, Chen continued. Humanity will not permit genocide. We will not allow the strong to prey upon the weak. We will not stand by while innocent people are murdered for convenience. And we will enforce these rules with whatever force is necessary. Councillor Thanemore's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated extreme distress. You're talking about imposing human moral standards on the entire galaxy. No, Chen replied. We're talking about imposing basic standards of decency. The prohibition against genocide isn't uniquely human, it's fundamental to any civilized society. If your species considers mass murder to be acceptable behavior, then perhaps you need to reconsider whether you qualify as civilized. The tactical display updated again, showing human fleets moving throughout the galaxy. Each fleet was heading toward a system where intelligence had indicated ongoing atrocities, slave worlds, mining operations using forced labor, research facilities conducting experiments on sapient subjects. You cannot police the entire galaxy, Thanemore protested. Watch us, Chen replied simply. Admiral Kim, deploy fleet groups 7 through 15. Initiate liberation protocol across all target systems. Aye, sir. All fleet groups report ready for deployment. The display showed massive human formations jumping to faster-than-light travel, heading toward star systems throughout the galaxy. Each fleet was larger than anything most species had ever assembled, equipped with weapons that represented the pinnacle of human theoretical science turned into practical military technology. This is madness, whispered Councillor Velnath. You'll destabilize the entire galactic order. The galactic order was built on slavery and genocide, Chen replied. If that's what passes for stability in your civilization, then destabilization is exactly what you need. He paused, looking directly into the camera that was transmitting his words to every member species of the Council. Humanity is offering you a choice, counselors. You can join us in creating a galaxy where the strong protect the weak instead of preying upon them. You can help us build institutions based on justice instead of convenience. You can choose to be part of a civilization that values life over territory. The image shifted one final time, showing the rescued Altharian survivors being cared for aboard human medical ships. Families being reunited, children being comforted, a species being given the chance to rebuild their shattered world. Or you can stand in our way, Chen continued quietly, and discover why we spent 50 years preparing for this day. The choice is yours, but understand this, the age of empires is over. The age of humanity has begun. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Outside their windows, the stars that had once seemed so distant and mysterious now seemed filled with possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. Humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 days after the fall of the Zephyrian Third Fleet, the galaxy was learning what it meant to live in a universe where humans existed. Councillor Thanemore stood in his private chambers aboard the council station, watching news feeds from across known space. Each report brought more impossible updates about human military operations that defied everything the galactic community thought they knew about warfare, technology, and the limits of what a single species could accomplish. The holographic display showed footage from the Rigel sector, where human forces had liberated 17 slave worlds in simultaneous operations.
The speed and precision of the attacks was beyond anything in military history. Zephyrian garrison forces that had held those worlds for centuries had been neutralized in hours, their weapons disabled by technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics. But it wasn't the military victories that disturbed Thanemore most, it was what came after. The humans hadn't simply conquered the worlds and declared them as territory. Instead, they had immediately begun massive humanitarian operations, providing medical care to slaves who had suffered under Zephyrian rule for generations, establishing temporary governments run by the liberated species themselves, and rebuilding infrastructure that had been designed to suppress rather than serve the local populations. Impossible, he murmured, watching human engineering teams construct hospitals and schools on worlds that had never known such luxuries. No species conquers territory only to give it away. His aide, a nervous Centaurian named Veltash, approached with the latest intelligence reports. Counselor, we're receiving additional data about human fleet dispositions. The numbers are disturbing. Thanemore accepted the datapad and felt his crystalline form dim as he processed the information. According to the most conservative estimates, humanity had deployed over 50,000 warships in the past 72 hours. Ships that appeared from stealth fields, emerged from hidden bases, or simply materialized at faster-than-light speeds that exceeded anything in the galactic databases. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence suggested they had perhaps 200 vessels total. Where did they hide 50,000 ships? We don't know, sir. Our analysts believe they've been building fleets in the void between star systems, using construction techniques that don't require fixed installations. Essentially, they've been constructing mobile shipyards that can operate in deep space. Thanemore studied the tactical analyses, trying to understand how a species with 50 years of space travel experience could outmaneuver civilizations that had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. The human ships used technologies that barely appeared on theoretical physics papers: quantum manipulation, temporal distortion, gravitational engineering on scales that should have required planetary-sized power sources. Sir, Veltash continued nervously, there's more. We're receiving reports from species throughout the galaxy. The humans aren't just attacking Zephyrian forces. They're targeting any organization engaged in what they termed crimes against sapient life. The display updated to show a star map with human fleet positions marked in red. They were everywhere, dismantling slavery operations run by the Vorthan Syndicate, shutting down forced labor camps operated by the Hegemony Mining Corporation, liberating research facilities where various species had been conducting experiments on captured aliens. They're systematically dismantling the entire galactic economy, Thanemore breathed. Do they understand what they're doing? As if in answer to his question, his communications console activated, displaying the seal of the Terran Defense Fleet. Admiral Chen's image appeared, as calm and professional as if he were discussing routine shipping schedules rather than the complete reorganization of galactic civilization. Counselor Thanemore, I trust you're monitoring our operations throughout the galaxy. I wanted to personally address some concerns that the Council has undoubtedly developed about our recent activities. Thanemore straightened his form and activated his own transmission. Admiral Chen, the Council demands an immediate cessation of hostilities. Your actions are destabilizing the entire galactic order. Trade routes are being disrupted, established governments are being overthrown, economic systems that have functioned for millennia are collapsing. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Yes, Counselor. That was intentional. The galactic order you're defending is built on slavery, genocide, and the systematic exploitation of weaker species. We consider it our moral obligation to destabilize such a system. But you cannot simply destroy civilization and expect something better to emerge from the chaos. We're not destroying civilization, Counselor. We're removing the cancerous elements that have prevented actual civilization from developing. The difference is significant. The display split to show simultaneous feeds from dozens of worlds where human forces were operating. On each world, the same pattern was repeating: swift military action to neutralize oppressive forces, followed by immediate humanitarian relief and the establishment of local governance structures. You see, Counselor, Admiral Chen continued, humanity has studied your galactic civilization very carefully. We identified the power structures that perpetuate injustice, the economic systems that rely on exploitation, and the legal frameworks that protect predators while abandoning their victims.
We've spent 50 years developing alternatives. Thanemore watched the footage with growing amazement. On former slave worlds, humans were training local security forces and establishing educational systems. On mining worlds, they were introducing technology that eliminated the need for forced labor while increasing productive efficiency. On research stations, they were converting weapons development facilities into medical research centers. "This is impossible," he murmured. "The logistics alone, how are you coordinating operations across thousands of light years simultaneously?"
"Quantum entanglement communication networks," Admiral Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We can coordinate fleet operations in real time regardless of distance. It's technology we developed specifically for this purpose. Real-time communication across galactic distances violates known physics." "Known physics according to your understanding," Chen corrected gently. "Human theoretical physicists solved the communication problem 30 years ago.
We just needed time to build the infrastructure."
Thanemore found himself struggling to process the implications. Instantaneous communication across any distance would revolutionize not just military coordination, but trade, governance, and social interaction throughout the galaxy. It was technology that would fundamentally reshape civilization itself.
"But why?" he demanded.
"Why go to such extraordinary lengths?
Why spend 50 years preparing for wars that might never have been necessary?
Why develop technologies that exceed anything in known space just to interfere in conflicts that don't directly affect your species?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against Thanemore's consciousness.
"Counselor, may I show you something?"
The display shifted to show historical footage from Earth, images of massive human conflicts, cities in ruins, landscapes scarred by weapons of unimaginable destructiveness. Thanemore had seen some of this material before in human cultural databases, but now it was being presented in a new context.
"This is what human civilization looked like for most of our history," Admiral Chen explained.
"We fought wars across continents, committed genocide against our own species, developed weapons capable of destroying all life on our planet. We turned warfare into an art form, then into a science, then into an industry that consumed entire nations." The images shifted to show more recent footage: massive construction projects, research facilities, universities where millions of humans worked together with unprecedented coordination. But, eventually, we learned something important.
We discovered that our talent for destruction could be turned toward protection. Our ability to develop devastating weapons could be used to create technologies that preserve life rather than end it.
Our skill at warfare could be deployed in the service of justice rather than conquest.
Now the display showed human rescue operations throughout the galaxy: medical ships treating refugees, construction teams rebuilding devastated worlds, diplomatic corps establishing new governments based on principles of consent rather than force. When we reached the stars and learned about the galaxy, we realized we had a choice. We could use our abilities to become another empire of predators, taking what we wanted from those too weak to resist. Or we could use our abilities to ensure that such empires could never again prey upon the innocent.
Admiral Chen leaned forward, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 40,000 innocent people died while the galaxy watched and did nothing.
That is unacceptable. It will not happen again. We have the power to prevent it, and, therefore, we have the responsibility to act. Thanemore felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. Throughout galactic history, advanced technology had meant the ability to impose one's will on others.
Stronger species conquered weaker ones, more advanced civilizations exploited less developed ones, and might made right in all circumstances that mattered. But humanity was demonstrating a completely different paradigm: the use of overwhelming technological superiority in the service of protecting those who could not protect themselves. It was a concept so alien to galactic norms that most species literally could not comprehend it. "Sir," Veltash interrupted nervously, "we're receiving priority communications from across the galaxy.
Multiple species are requesting council emergency sessions."
Thanemore accepted the incoming messages and felt his form dim further as he read them. The Vorthan Syndicate was demanding council intervention to stop human interference with their legitimate business operations that consisted primarily of slave trading and forced labor. The Hegemony Mining Corporation wanted protection from human forces that were liberating their work camps and freeing enslaved miners. The Kithaeron Empire was protesting human violations of their territorial sovereignty, territory they had claimed by exterminating the previous inhabitants. But other messages told a different story. Species that had never been represented on the council because they lacked the military power to demand inclusion were sending messages of gratitude and support. Former slave species were asking how they could assist human operations. Worlds that had lived in fear of their more powerful neighbors were volunteering to host human bases and supply stations. Counselor, Admiral Chen continued, the galaxy is at a crossroads. You can continue to support systems based on exploitation and oppression, or you can join us in building something better. But, understand this, we will not permit the strong to prey upon the weak. Not now, not ever. Thanemore looked at the star map showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. They were moving with purpose and precision, dismantling institutions that had seemed permanent and untouchable only days before. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of galactic civilization through the simple expedient of having the power to enforce a different set of values. What do you want from the Council? He asked quietly. Help us, Admiral Chan replied simply. Join us in creating institutions based on justice rather than convenience. Help us establish legal frameworks that protect the innocent rather than enabling their exploitation. Use your influence to encourage cooperation rather than conquest. And, if we refuse? Then, you'll become irrelevant. We're not asking for your permission, Counselor. We're offering you the opportunity to be part of the solution. The transmission ended, leaving Thanemore alone with his aide and the growing realization that everything he thought he knew about the galaxy had just become obsolete. Outside his windows, the stars that had once seemed so fixed and eternal now seemed to pulse with new possibilities. Humanity had arrived, and the universe would never be the same. Veltash approached hesitantly. Counselor, what are your orders? Thanemore studied the tactical displays, watching human fleets continue their operations throughout known space. Each fleet was larger than anything the Council could deploy, equipped with technologies that seemed to violate natural law, and crewed by beings who had voluntarily accepted a mission to protect strangers they would never meet. Schedule an emergency council session, he said finally. All member species, maximum priority. We need to decide whether we're going to adapt to this new reality or be swept aside by it. As his aide hurried to carry out the orders, Thanemore remained at his window, watching the stars and trying to imagine a galaxy where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. It was a concept so foreign to his experience that he could barely comprehend it. But, perhaps, he thought, that was exactly what the galaxy needed, something completely foreign to everything they had known before. 7 days after first contact with the human fleet, Emperor Caxthul of the Zephyrian Empire found himself in a position that no Zephyrian ruler had experienced in over 3 millennia: total military defeat. He stood in the command chamber of his personal dreadnought, the Eternal Dominion, watching tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of everything his species had built across dozens of star systems. Human forces had swept through the Empire like a tide of technological inevitability, dismantling military installations, liberating slave worlds, and systematically destroying every aspect of Zephyrian power projection. But they hadn't simply conquered. That would have been comprehensible. Instead, they had done something far more disturbing. They had judged. Your Majesty, chittered General Vexkarn, his carapace showing stress fractures from the psychological strain of the past week, the humans are requesting your presence aboard their flagship for what they term war crimes proceedings. Caxthul's compound eyes focused on the tactical display showing the human fleet that had surrounded his position. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering that exceeded anything in Zephyrian science, but what disturbed him most was their formation. They weren't positioned for attack or defense, they were arranged like a court of law, with his ship at the center like a defendant awaiting judgment. War crimes, he repeated, tasting the alien concept. They would put an emperor on trial like a common criminal? Sir, I don't think they recognize the distinction, Vexkarn replied nervously. Their legal system appears to be based on the principle that no individual is above judgment for their actions, regardless of their position or species. A communication request appeared on the main display, and Caxthul found himself looking once again at the face of Admiral Chenwei. The human appeared exactly as calm and professional as he had during their first encounter, as if the complete conquest of a galactic empire was merely another day's work. Emperor Caxthal, Admiral Chen said formally, "You and your senior command staff are hereby required to appear before a Terran military tribunal to answer charges of genocide, crimes against humanity, and violations of the universal rights of sapient beings."
Universal rights?
Caxthal's mandibles clicked in confusion. No such legal framework exists.
The galaxy operates under the doctrine of territorial sovereignty.
Not anymore, Admiral Chan replied quietly. As of yesterday, the Galactic Council voted to adopt the Terran Bill of Universal Rights as the fundamental legal framework for interstellar civilization. 67 member species voted in favor, 12 voted against, and 5 abstained.
The numbers hit Caxthal like a physical blow.
The Council had effectively voted to restructure the entire basis of galactic law in less than a week. Territorial sovereignty, the principle that allowed strong species to rule weak ones within their claimed territories, had been replaced by human concepts of individual rights and legal accountability.
Impossible, he breathed. The Council has never moved that quickly on anything.
Legal frameworks take decades to develop, years to ratify. The humans provided a complete legal framework, Admiral Chen interrupted.
Comprehensive, detailed, and ready for immediate implementation.
They had apparently been developing it for decades in anticipation of this moment. The display shifted to show footage from the council chambers, where representatives from dozens of species were debating the new legal codes.
Caxthal could see the fear in their body language, the uncertainty in their communications.
They were voting not from conviction, but from the recognition that refusing might put them on the wrong side of human military power. "You coerced them," Caxthal accused. "We convinced them," Admiral Chen corrected. "We demonstrated that the old system was unsustainable by showing them what happens to those who abuse their power under it. The Council voted to adopt our framework because the alternative was to become irrelevant to galactic governance." General Vexkarn approached with additional reports, his movements jerky with stress.
"Your Majesty, we're receiving updates from across the Empire.
Human forces have established what they call transitional governments on every world we controlled. They're conducting what they term truth and reconciliation proceedings with local populations."
Caxthal studied the reports, trying to understand what the humans were doing. On world after world, they had established tribunals where former slaves and oppressed populations could testify about their treatment under Zephyrian rule.
The proceedings were being broadcast throughout the galaxy, providing detailed documentation of centuries of systematic abuse and exploitation. But the humans weren't simply collecting testimony, they were using it to build legal cases against specific Zephyrian officials, from planetary governors to military commanders to administrators who had implemented policies of oppression. Every crime was being catalogued, every victim identified, every perpetrator tracked down for eventual prosecution.
"This is madness," Caxthal muttered. "You cannot put an entire empire on trial."
"The logistics alone, we have 15 million humans dedicated specifically to this task," Admiral Chen replied. "Legal specialists, investigators, translators, and support staff.
We've been training them for this purpose for 20 years. The scope of human preparation continued to stagger Caxthal's mind.
They hadn't simply built a military force capable of conquering the galaxy, they had built a complete alternative system of governance, law enforcement, and social organization. They had anticipated not just victory, but the responsibilities that would come after victory.
"Why?" he demanded.
"Why go to such lengths? Why spend decades preparing to judge species you had never even met?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, and, when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to echo across space itself. "Emperor Caxthal, let me tell you about a place called Nuremberg." The display shifted to show historical footage from Earth, a courtroom where humans in military uniforms sat before judges, being held accountable for atrocities committed during one of their species' global conflicts. Caxthal watched as evidence was presented, testimonies were given, and sentences were pronounced. "After our most devastating global war, humanity faced a choice," Admiral Chen explained. "We could simply execute the leaders of the losing side and move on, or we could establish legal precedents that would govern the behavior of all humans in all future conflicts. We chose law." The footage showed more trials, more proceedings, decades of humans slowly building legal frameworks designed to prevent the horrors they had inflicted upon themselves. Caxthal watched the development of concepts like crimes against humanity, genocide, and universal jurisdiction, legal principles that declared certain acts to be violations of basic morality regardless of where or by whom they were committed. We learned that power without accountability leads inevitably to atrocity, Admiral Chen continued. We learned that those with the ability to commit great crimes must be held to the highest standards of conduct. And we learned that justice delayed is justice denied. Now the display showed the development of human space technology, but from a perspective Caxthal had never seen before. Alongside the starships and weapons systems, humans had been building courts, training judges, developing procedures for investigating crimes across interstellar distances. They had created a complete system of justice designed to operate on a galactic scale. When we learned about the Zephyrian Empire, about the 17 species you drove to extinction, about the slave worlds and the forced labor camps and the systematic oppression of billions of sapient beings, we knew this day would come. We knew that eventually, someone would have to hold you accountable. Admiral Chen leaned forward, and his eyes held the weight of absolute moral certainty. That someone is us, Your Majesty. We are humanity, and we do not permit genocide. The transmission paused as another human appeared on screen, Dr. Martinez, the xenolinguist who had first explained human intentions to the Zephyrian fleet. But now she wore the robes of a legal officer, and her expression carried the authority of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Emperor Caxthal, she said formally, you are charged with ordering the genocide of the Eltharian colony on Kepler 442b, resulting in the deaths of 40,307 innocent beings. You are further charged with maintaining a system of slavery encompassing 47 star systems and affecting an estimated 12 billion sapient beings. You are additionally charged with the systematic extermination of 17 sapient species over the past 3 millennia. The specificity of the charges shocked Caxthal. They had exact numbers, precise dates, detailed evidence spanning thousands of years of Zephyrian history. The level of investigation required to compile such evidence should have taken decades, yet they were presenting it after only a week of contact. How do you have such detailed records? He demanded. We've been monitoring galactic communications for 50 years, Dr. Martinez replied. Every transmission, every data transfer, every administrative record. We've built a complete database of criminal activity throughout known space. We know exactly what crimes were committed, when they occurred, and who was responsible. The implications hit Caxthal like a physical blow. For 50 years, while the galaxy had dismissed humanity as primitive and irrelevant, they had been watching, learning, documenting, building cases against every empire, every corporation, every organization that profited from the suffering of others. You were spying on the entire galaxy, he breathed. We were gathering evidence, Admiral Chen corrected. Evidence that will now be used to ensure that the perpetrators of genocide face justice for their crimes. General Vexkarn approached with new reports, his movements now showing signs of complete systemic shock. Your Majesty, we're receiving similar charges against virtually every member of the Imperial command structure. Military commanders, planetary governors, administrative officials, they have detailed evidence against thousands of our personnel. Caxthal looked around his command chamber at officers who had served the Empire faithfully for decades. Each one had followed orders, implemented policies, and carried out directives that had seemed perfectly legal under Zephyrian law. Now they were being told that galactic law had changed, and that they were personally responsible for actions that were now classified as crimes against sapient life. This is retroactive justice, he protested. You cannot change legal standards and, then, prosecute people for violating laws that didn't exist when they acted. The laws against genocide have always existed, Dr. Martinez replied firmly. They exist in the basic moral framework that any sapient species develops naturally. The prohibition against murdering innocent beings isn't a human invention, it's a fundamental requirement of civilized behavior. She gestured toward the display, which now showed testimony from survivors of Zephyrian conquest campaigns. Beings from dozens of species described the systematic destruction of their worlds, the murder of their families, the enslavement of their children. Your empire knew these actions caused suffering. Your commanders understood that their orders would result in the deaths of innocent beings. Your administrators recognized that their policies created misery on an unimaginable scale.
Ignorance of galactic law is not a defense against violations of basic morality.
Caxthal found himself staring at the faces of victims he had never seen before, beings who had died because of orders he had given, policies he had approved, campaigns he had authorized. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had treated other species as resources to be harvested rather than people to be respected. Now, for the first time, he was being forced to confront the true cost of that philosophy.
"What happens now?" he asked quietly. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "Now you face trial, Your Majesty.
You and your command staff will be given the opportunity to present your defense, to explain your actions, and to demonstrate any mitigating factors that might affect your sentences."
"And if we're found guilty?"
"Then, you'll face the consequences appropriate to your crimes," Dr. Martinez replied. "Some of your subordinates who followed orders without understanding their implications may receive reduced sentences. Others who initiated or enthusiastically implemented genocidal policies will face the full weight of galactic justice."
"And me?" Admiral Chen met his gaze steadily.
"You ordered the deaths of 40,000 innocent beings 6 days ago, Your Majesty. You maintained systems of oppression that caused suffering on a scale difficult to comprehend. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the crimes are among the most serious in galactic history." Caxthal felt something fundamental break inside his consciousness, the absolute certainty that had sustained him throughout his reign.
For 3 millennia, Zephyrian emperors had ruled through the simple principle that might made right.
Now he was facing beings who possessed overwhelming might but chose to exercise it in the service of principles that transcended power. "Your ship will be escorted to the tribunal vessel," Admiral Chen continued. "You will be treated with the dignity appropriate to your position and species, but you will face judgment for your actions.
This is not negotiable."
The communication ended, leaving Caxthal alone with his senior staff and the growing realization that the universe had fundamentally changed. Outside his viewports, human ships moved with the precision of predators, but they were predators unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, beings who hunted injustice rather than weakness, who used their power to protect rather than exploit.
For the first time in his life, the Emperor of the Zephyrian Empire was afraid.
Not of death, which would have been simple, but of judgment, which promised to be far more challenging to face. 1 year after the first human ship responded to an Altharian distress signal, the galaxy had become a place that no species would have recognized. Councillor Thanemore stood in the observation deck of the rebuilt Council Station, watching construction ships from dozens of species working together to complete the new Galactic Justice Center. The massive structure orbited a neutral star system, its crystalline spires reflecting light in patterns that symbolized the unity of purpose that had emerged from the chaos of the previous year. Below him, in the center's main courtroom, the final session of the Zephyrian War Crimes Tribunal was reaching its conclusion. Emperor Caxthal sat in the defendant's position, flanked by human legal advocates who had spent months ensuring he received the fairest possible trial according to the new galactic legal standards. The irony was not lost on Thanemore that the species most committed to justice was also the one most determined to ensure that justice was administered fairly, even to their enemies. "Has the defendant anything to say before the court renders its final judgment?" asked Chief Justice Sarah Hassan, a human legal scholar who had been unanimously appointed by the council to oversee the establishment of the new judicial system. Caxthal rose slowly, his once golden carapace now dulled by the weight of a year spent confronting the true cost of his empire's actions. The evidence presented during the trial had been overwhelming: detailed documentation of systematic genocide, comprehensive testimony from survivors, and forensic analysis of destroyed worlds that painted a picture of cruelty on an almost incomprehensible scale. "Your Honor," Caxthal said quietly, "when this trial began, I believed that I was the victim of an unjust process imposed by a species that had no right to judge Zephyrian actions. I believed that our conquests were justified by the natural order that grants strength the right to rule over weakness." He paused, looking around the courtroom at the representatives of dozens of species who had come to witness this moment. Many were survivors of Zephyrian aggression, beings whose worlds had been devastated and whose families had been destroyed by policies he had personally authorized. "I have spent this year listening to testimony from beings whose names I never knew, whose worlds I never visited, whose suffering I never considered. I have learned about the cost of policies I treated as simple administrative decisions. I have seen the faces of children who died because of orders I gave without thought. His voice grew stronger, carrying a weight of understanding that had been entirely absent when the trial began.
I cannot undo the harm that I caused.
I cannot restore the lives that were lost because of my actions. I cannot bring back the species that were driven to extinction under my rule.
Thanemore watched from the observation deck as the emperor of a fallen empire took responsibility for crimes that spanned centuries.
It was a moment that would have been impossible under the old galactic order, where power protected those who wielded it from the consequences of their actions.
But, I can accept responsibility for what I did, Caxthal continued. I can acknowledge that the suffering I caused was real, that the beings who died were people with hopes and dreams and families who loved them. I can admit that I was wrong, and that the system I upheld was fundamentally evil. Chief Justice Hassan nodded solemnly. Thank you, Your Majesty.
The court has considered all evidence presented during this trial, all testimony from both survivors and character witnesses, and all legal precedents established by the new Galactic Charter of Rights.
The courtroom fell silent as beings from across known space waited to hear how justice would be administered in this new age of accountability.
On the charge of genocide against the Eltharian colony on Kepler 442b, the court finds the defendant guilty. On the charges of maintaining systematic slavery across 47 star systems, the court finds the defendant guilty. On the charges of crimes against sapient life spanning 3 millennia, the court finds the defendant guilty. Justice Hassan paused, allowing the weight of the verdict to settle throughout the courtroom and across the galaxy, where billions of beings were watching the proceedings. However, the court also recognizes that the defendant has shown genuine remorse for his actions, has cooperated fully with this tribunal, and has demonstrated a fundamental change in his understanding of the moral principles that should govern the interaction between sapient species.
Thanemore leaned forward, curious about how human concepts of justice would balance accountability with the possibility of redemption.
Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to life imprisonment, with the possibility of supervised release after serving a minimum of 50 years. The defendant will spend his incarceration working with rehabilitation programs designed to help other former imperial officials understand the consequences of their actions and develop frameworks for preventing future atrocities. The sentence was both harsh and merciful, holding Caxthal accountable for his crimes while offering the possibility of eventual redemption through genuine service to those his empire had harmed.
It was a uniquely human approach to justice that emphasized rehabilitation over simple punishment.
As the proceedings concluded, Thanemore made his way to Admiral Chen's private office aboard the human flagship UES Retribution. The Admiral stood before a massive display showing the current disposition of human forces throughout the galaxy, but the image that caught Thanemore's attention was not of warships or military bases. Instead, the display showed construction projects, medical facilities, educational institutions, and research centers that humans had established on liberated worlds throughout known space. What had begun as a military intervention had evolved into the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history.
Admiral, Thanemore said as he entered, the tribunal has concluded. Emperor Caxthal has been sentenced to life imprisonment. Admiral Chen nodded without turning from the display. Justice Hassan sent me the verdict. 50 years minimum with possibility of rehabilitation. It's appropriate.
Many species expected you to simply execute him, Thanemore observed. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his crimes were among the worst in recorded history.
Execution would have been easier, Chen agreed.
But it wouldn't have served justice. Caxthal spent a year learning to understand the consequences of his actions. He can spend the rest of his life helping others avoid repeating his mistakes. Thanemore studied the human admiral, still struggling to understand the psychology of a species that could develop weapons capable of destroying worlds but chose to use that power in service of principles that transcended simple dominance.
Admiral, may I ask you something that has puzzled me throughout this entire process?
Chen turned to face him, his expression curious.
Of course, Counselor. Why didn't you simply conquer the galaxy for yourselves?
You have the military capability to defeat any combination of species that might oppose you. You could have established a human empire that would make the Zephyrians look insignificant. Instead, you dismantled existing power structures and gave the liberated worlds the right to govern themselves.
I don't understand the logic.
Admiral Chen smiled, the first time Thanemore had seen the human display anything approaching humor during their year-long acquaintance.
Counselor, that's exactly why we didn't conquer the galaxy. We dismantled the Zephyrian Empire because empires are fundamentally unjust.
It would be rather hypocritical to replace one empire with another, even if we could administer it more benevolently. He gestured toward the display, which now showed democratic elections taking place on dozens of former Zephyrian worlds, with beings who had never before been allowed to participate in their own governance learning to choose their leaders and determine their futures.
Human history taught us that power corrupts, Counselor.
No species, including our own, can be trusted with absolute authority over others. The moment we claimed the right to rule other species, we would begin the same process of moral decay that eventually destroys every empire in history.
Thanemore felt a fundamental shift in his understanding of galactic politics.
Throughout history, advanced species had sought to expand their influence and control over others. The idea of deliberately limiting one's own power in favor of principles that served the common good was entirely alien to conventional thinking.
But surely you must maintain some level of authority to prevent future atrocities, he protested.
The systems you've established, the laws you've created, the institutions you've built, they require enforcement mechanisms.
They do, Chen agreed. That's why we've created the Galactic Defense Force.
The display updated to show a new organizational structure that Thanemore had been hearing about but never fully understood. Instead of national or species-based military forces, humans were establishing integrated units that drew personnel from every willing species in the galaxy, trained them according to uniform standards, and deployed them under a unified command structure dedicated to preventing future genocides.
Humans will contribute about 30% of the total force, Chen explained.
The other 70% will come from species throughout the galaxy who have volunteered to help maintain the new order. Command positions will rotate between species based on merit rather than political influence, and no single species will ever control more than 40% of the total force. You're distributing power rather than concentrating it, Thanemore realized.
Exactly.
The new system is designed to make it impossible for any one species to dominate others, while ensuring that the collective galactic community has the capability to prevent future atrocities.
Thanemore studied the organizational charts, trying to understand how such a complex system could function effectively.
The logistics of coordinating military forces from dozens of species with different technologies, tactics, and cultural approaches seemed overwhelming.
How do you maintain unity of command across such diversity?
The same way we maintained unity during our own operations, Chen replied. Shared principles, standardized training, and common purpose. Every being who joins the Galactic Defense Force swears an oath to protect innocent life regardless of species, to prevent genocide regardless of who commits it, and to serve justice rather than power. The display shifted to show training facilities throughout the galaxy where beings from dozens of species were learning to work together, sharing technologies and tactics in the service of their common mission. Thanemore could see the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history, a military force that existed not to serve any particular government or species, but to protect the principles that would allow all species to coexist peacefully.
What about humanity's role in all this? Thanemore asked.
Your species has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything in known space.
How do you prevent that superiority from eventually corrupting your commitment to these principles?
Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, and, when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had spent years considering exactly that question.
By remembering why we're here, Counselor.
By never forgetting the images of those 40,000 Altharians who died while the galaxy watched and did nothing. By maintaining institutions that hold us accountable for our actions, just as we've held others accountable for theirs. He gestured toward a section of the display that showed human officials appearing before galactic tribunals, submitting to the same legal oversight that they had imposed on others. Every human military commander is subject to review by mixed-species courts. Every policy decision affecting other worlds must be approved by the Galactic Council. Every action we take is monitored and evaluated according to the same standards we've established for everyone else.
And if humanity ever violates those standards?
Then, the same justice system we've created will hold us accountable, Chen replied without hesitation. The principles we've established are more important than any single species, including our own. If humanity ever becomes what the Zephyrian Empire was, then humanity will face the same consequences.
Thanemore felt something shift in his understanding of what was possible in the universe.
For the first time in galactic history, a species had demonstrated the wisdom to limit its own power in favor of principles that served the common good. It was an example that would echo through the centuries, shaping how civilizations understood the relationship between power and responsibility.
"Admiral," he said quietly, "I think you may have created something truly unprecedented."
Not just a new form of government or a new military alliance, but a new